Leviticus chapter 20. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Again that thou shalt say to the children of Israel, Whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary, and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do any wise hide their eyes from the man, when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man, and against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go a-whoring after him, to commit whoredom with Molech, from among their people. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people. Sanctify yourselves therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. And ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctify you. For every one that curseth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. He hath cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have brought confusion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man take a wife and her mother, and it is wickedness, they shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. And if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. And if a woman approach unto any beast, and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his iniquity. And if a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood. And both of them shall be cut off from among their people. And thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, nor of thy father's sister, for he uncovereth his near kin. They shall bear their iniquity. And if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, he hath uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them, that the land whither I bring you to dwell therein spew you not out. And ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. And I have said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, which hath separated you from other people. Ye shall therefore put difference between clean beasts and unclean, and between unclean fowls and clean. And ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast, or by fowl, or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I the Lord am holy, and have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine. A man also or woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for the reading of your word, and that we can freely do so. And Lord, I pray that you would bless the sermon. Lord, bless our pastor as he comes before us to preach your word. Lord, I pray for my mom as she's not feeling well, Lord. Heal her, please, and just help her to feel better, Lord, and just bless the rest of our day, Lord. Help us to be thankful and praise you always for the good things you do in our lives. And I just ask all these things in your precious name. Amen.
right. Leviticus chapter 20. So remember, from previous weeks we've been studying about Leviticus chapter 18. Basically, is giving the similar list of things that are happening, but Leviticus chapter 18 talks about how they're wrong and not right and all the stuff, and we covered a lot of that stuff. But then chapter 20 goes on to explain what the penalty is for those abominations, for doing those things that are not right, that will cause you to be spewed out of the land in which you dwell. Remember last 2 weeks ago in chapter 18, we learned that these things were what caused the people that without a covenant were spewed out before the people of Israel, and then those people that have a covenant with God, so too are underneath the same penalty as if they commit these things, and they too will be spewed out. And then we dealt with the fact that these things are transferable. These things are not just like, oh, well, if you're children of Israel, then you're not allowed to do them, but if you're another nation, it's okay. You know, a lot of people get this idea, well, those laws were just for Israel because they have a covenant with God and all this stuff, but, you know, we don't have that national covenant and all this stuff. But then showing that the reason why God said for them to do them was because he got rid of the other people that didn't have a covenant. It shows us as well that these things are not just limited to a certain group of people for a certain group of time, but rather these things are transferable to any nation, any society. God deals with these things as being very serious and very vile. And so we, in order to understand if something is wrong in society, it's not just you can't just say, well, you shouldn't do that, and if you do that, then you're a bad person. Shame on you, and give them a slap on the wrist, and then they just go their merry way. Because if something is severe and very bad and evil, then you need to have a punishment that fits the crime, right? You need to realize that, for example, if we have speed limit laws, just a simple one that we all violate every day. If we had speed limit laws, and then but the law says you're not allowed to go above 55 miles an hour or whatever the posted speed limit sign is. Typically on an average artery, like a major road in the city, it's 35. It's a minor road, it's 25. It's like a little side street, maybe it's a little less, maybe 20 near a school or something like that. And so you have all these things, and so we all see the signs. Okay, let's all just voluntarily follow those signs because we just love the law and love all these wonderful things. And if we violate them, oh well, that's oops, and just go on your merry way. You think we would have no speeders whatsoever? You think people would be going 20 miles an hour through the school zone and everything without a punishment, no penalty? Oh, I can go 100 miles through the school zone, nobody's going to do anything about it. It's almost ludicrous to think that, now obviously as Christians we ought to be doing those things anyway, and just because we were asked to do them and so forth in a just and righteous society does not need to be penalized for those things. What did Christ say? Is against such there is no law. If you do the things that are right, there's no law that's going to say, oh, you gave somebody $100. How dare you? It's like whatever. You said a nice word to somebody. How dare you? And no, the law is not going to penalize you for doing right. But it penalizes them. They have the law. The law has the sword in order to punish the evildoer. Right. The same way here is that if God just says those things are wrong, those things are evil, but there's no consequence for them, then there's no limitation. There's nothing stopping them from doing it. The problem with the society today is that a majority of these things on this list in chapter 18 and then also chapter 20, we no longer have, while there's, obviously people frown on them and stuff like that, there's no longer a penalty for a lot of these things. And there's still penalties for incest and so forth and different things like that, but we're starting to see those things go away slowly and slowly, and then as the penalties go away and they're not enforced, then we see the rise of these things going up and up and up. And so the penalty has to be severe so that they know the seriousness of the crime. If it's only a $10 fine, it's not that big a deal. I sped on the street, I sped on the sidewalk, I'm not going to get death penalty for spitting on the sidewalk. I might get a fine for, just dirtying up the road or whatever, occasionally, depending on the ordinance, right? And so there's the punishment fitting the crime. And so showing the seriousness of these things, we see quite clearly that if we do these things, the land will vomit us out, spew us out. God will be against us. God will oppose them, and God will cut them off from their people. We see all these punishments for these things, and God will cut them off from their people. He'll mark them for life to bear their shame. He will say they'll bear their iniquity, and even up to the point of telling for certain of these crimes that their blood will be upon them. Their blood will be upon them. In other words, remember, Levitical priesthood is all about you taking a sacrifice to the Lord of a substitutionary atonement, a substitutionary blood atonement, and then if they say, the Bible says, you're going to bear your blood for this crime, that means that there's no substitutionary atonement for you in that. So we need to be very careful in these things, and especially with Romans chapter 1 telling us that as we spiral through sin, God giving them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient for them, that are worthy of death, giving pleasure in them that do them. We see in Romans chapter 1 that, hey, these things have consequences. If we do these things in this passage, they have consequences that do not be like, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, now that you're sorry, you go on your merry way. No, these things mean that there's going to be a mark upon you. Romans 1 explaining how that if you continue in that cycle of sin, then it's less and less likely that God will give you a reprieve. He will eventually give you up to your own reprobate mind, and so forth. So let's take a look at these things and see the penalty for these things. The first thing we, of course, see is the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death, and the people of the land shall stone him with stones. So the first penalty we see here is giving of your seed to Molech. Now, Molech is basically the god of the Ammonites, the god of the people that were in the land, and he was the god of fertility, and if you want abundant crops, you sacrifice your first child to me, your firstborn child to me, or any child to me, and then I will bless you with some sort of blessing or whatever. And so you gave him your child. Basically, he was a metal idol with a burning furnace in his belly, and then he has hands outstretched that would glow red hot from the fire. And then they would put the child, the already born child, onto the hands. The child would burn to death in those hands. That was called passing your seed to Molech. And the blessings you got supposedly was that the ashes from the child be scattered upon your land, and then the idol would bless your crops or whatever and so forth. But essentially, we understand from culture and history that this was just basically another way to get rid of their children that they did not want. And the modern version of this, of course, is basically infanticide, I guess it is, where you kill your own children, where you have an abortion, where you do all these things to get rid of your child. Excuses they will have, well, I'm just not ready to have a child yet, or whatever reason they give, or maybe they say, oh, the child's the wrong hair color in certain countries. They say, oh, the child's got the wrong genetics, and all these things. And so, because not the child that they want, they basically abort the child, end its life. And so whether you do it before it exits the womb or after it exits the womb is no big deal. In those things, the fact remains that you killed your child. And remember, this is also, a lot of times, again, people are always focused on whether it should be the doctor or the mother or who should be bearing the punishment of killing the child or aborting the child or whatever this thing is. But the scripture is quite clear that in the case of killing a child, giving your seed over to Molech, it's quite clear is that it specifically says your seed. So if you as a man, because obviously if you think about this, a lady who aborts their child had what? A man who gave her the seed for that child, right? And so what the scripture says is the man's responsibility to watch out where his seed goes. And so if you're going around spreading your seed and allowing it to enter into women that it ought not, then you ought to bear the iniquity of that child that has been burned to Moloch. It says, thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, whoever he is, doesn't say she, it doesn't say the doctor, it doesn't say the priest of Moloch, it says he. It says the guy who spread his seed. So we need to be careful. We need to understand that God specifically puts the blame of abortion and killing your children upon the man who gave that child. The Bible says, additionally, that the giving of the seed of Moloch is additionally what caused the children of Israel to be destroyed. And of course, let's look a little bit more at this. He says, and I will set my face against that man. It doesn't say against that lady or against that priest of Moloch or anything. He says, I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people. So the first thing is he needs to be stoned with stones. They need to get rid of him. And then the second thing is he says, I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given his seed unto Moloch to defile my sanctuary, to profane my holy name. So specifically what he's saying here is that you who kill your children, you who give your seed to Moloch to die, or for whatever reason to allow your child to die, because remember, every soul that lives and is given life is God. God is the one who gives life. He's the only one who has the right to take life away. And so these people who give their child to Moloch are basically executing their children before their time. And God says, that's not right, that's evil, I'm going to set my face against you. Whoever sheds the blood of a child is the one who should be, his blood should be shed. And so to stone the man, if he's not stoned, then I'm going to put my face against him. He's going to resist the proud, he's going to resist the evil, because that man hath given his seed unto Moloch. And here's the reason why God is so offended by it. He says, to defile my sanctuary. You're defiling my people. You're defiling, remember this is Leviticus, the book for the priests, the book for the people that go to church, and Deuteronomy is book for the nation. And so Leviticus gives the rules for the people that go to church, that go to the congregation of the righteous, and so forth. And then Deuteronomy gives the laws for the nation itself. And so here he's saying, because you who supposedly, you see a lot of people that claim, oh, I'm a Christian, I go to church, I do all these things, I'm so sanctimonious and I'm so religious, but I'm going sleeping around with all the ladies. I'm going around not caring for my children that I've procreated and the ladies that I procreated with, and I'm just doing all this lustful, fleshful lifestyle, going around and causing women who have my children to abort them. I'm going around doing all these evil, vile things with my seed. Then God's going to say, hey, I'm going to set my face against you in particular because you're defiling my sanctuary with your evil actions. Oh, holy Christian on Sunday, evil man sleeping around throughout the rest of the week. So to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. You claim to be a Christian, and yet you're going around sleeping with all these people. I'm going to set my face against you. Don't you think that you're part of mine? You're none of mine. I don't want you around here. I don't want you in my sanctuary. You'll defile it. And so he says, you guys, the land. So sociably, they're supposed to stone him. Church-wise, even if society does not stone them, then God says basically church-wise, my face is going to be against you. You cannot claim to be a Christian and abort your children. It's just wrong. It's just evil and vile. Now obviously there's forgiveness for that, and this is not what that chapter is about. This is about the penalty. I'm not going to go around apologizing for the penalty of what God said upon killing your children. It's particularly not in this chapter. And we'll deal with those things in a little bit. But here basically to profane my holy name. You claim to be that. You claim to be such a holy person. You're going around killing your seed and destroying and ruining the women that you've had seed with and had children with. And if the people of this land do in any ways hide their eyes from the man when he giveth of his seed unto Moloch, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man, and against his family. See, relatives, if you have people in your family, it's your responsibility to say, hey, don't abort your child. Hey, aunt, uncle, sister, daughter, whoever you are in my family, have the child. Forget about that deadbeat who ruined your life or whatever, and all those excuses and whatever. Have the child. It's a life. You have a responsibility from God to care for that life. And God will take care of that man who inseminated you. God will take care of him. He's going to be taken care of. He's worthy of death. So you don't compound on that by killing that man. So oftentimes people are raped and such horrendous things happening to ladies and so forth. But don't compound that by causing the death of a child. They don't deserve that. He says, and if the people of the land do anyways hide their eyes from the man when he giveth his seed to Moloch, and kill him not, they just allow this to continue in their society, then I will set my face against that man, and then against his family, and I will cut him off, and all that go a whoring after him. Now remember, a whoring is basically you're just going one after the other. You're doing it for money. You're doing it for whatever. You are basically that lady on the street corner, just kind of, that guy on the street corner, that lady on the street corner. You're going around, one day you're with God and you're worshiping the Lord, and the next day you're in the bar, spreading your seed and all those things, and going to whoring after them to commit whoredom with Moloch. What that means is that people that have that spread their seed before, out of wedlock and then end up having all these abortions, that man going bar to bar and having a one-night stand and everything like that is spreading his seed. He's going to whoring after Moloch. He claims to be a Christian or whatever, or claims to be godly, and yet he's defiling God's sanctuary, and he's living that evil lifestyle. He says, oh, that's not a problem with that. I can live this lifestyle. God says, hey, no, you can't. You're going to whoring every day with Moloch. You're worshiping an idol. You in your lifestyle are worshiping an idol. You're not worshiping me. And so this is very important to understand, is that when you go spreading seed as men, in particular, and then you are whoring with Moloch. You're like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm just having a good time. No, you're whoring with Moloch. That's what that's called in the Bible. Whoring with Moloch is whenever you have one lady after another spreading your seed and allowing them to have the ramifications, have the abortions, and all those things. Now, the 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8 says, this is what Paul the Apostle says about people that don't care. Like these, basically, this is an admonition against deadbeat dads, against people that spread their seed outside of wedlock, not caring whether or not their children are cared for, and allowing the mothers to have abortions. See, it's the man who causes these things in the society. It's not the mother and all these things. It's the deadbeat man. He says, 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 6, if somebody supposedly, oh yeah, I'm a Christian and I'm saved, and yet I'm having this horrible lifestyle, whoring with Moloch, he says in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, it says, but if any provide for not his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel. You're worse than the ungodly people who take care of your family. You don't think that you're the same. So the first thing he makes clear is that men who whore with Moloch are worthy of death. They should be stoned, and my face is against them. Don't think that you have any favor with God living such a lifestyle. That's the very first thing it addresses in this list is men. Now remember chapter 18, verse and so forth. And a lot of people, in society, especially today, they get up in arms about, the sodomite this, or the homosexual that, and they got all these rude things they say about this special sin or that special sin that they themselves are not doing. But the very first sin that he addresses in this passage is one that a lot of people do in our society today that they think is no big deal. Is to spread their seed and sleep around and to do those things. God says, no, that's the very first thing I want out of the land. I don't want you doing that. I want you to one man, one woman for life, and don't you be spreading your seed to Moloch. Don't you provide and take care of your children, because otherwise you're defiling my sanctuary, you're defiling my holy name, and that is wrong. So this is the very first thing that he talks about with a death penalty, and not only just a death penalty, but a relational penalty. There are certain penalties where if I myself do them, then I am in the wrong and God is against me. But this sin, where we're allowing our children to sleep around and do all these different things, it says it's a family matter. Your children and your kids, when they reach the age of being able to lay around with other people and stuff, you need to teach them to be saved for marriage. Teach them not to be spreading their seed around because they're going whoring after Moloch. You need to. A lot of people today say, "Oh, it's just spreading their wild oats or whatever." No, God says, "No, you're idol worshiping." In fact, the Bible explains that this is the major reason why a lot of the wickedness happened in Israel. And Acts chapter 7, verses 41 through 43, he explains this is why one of the biggest reasons why they spent 40 years wandering around in the wilderness of Israel. Acts chapter 7, verse 41 through 43. Stephen, the faithful servant Stephen, he says that they in the wilderness, he says, God turned, and they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifices to the idol and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as is written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, have ye offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by a space of 40 years in the wilderness? Oh, we're worshiping God, we're doing the righteous things, we're keeping his sanctuary. Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch. While you're worshiping in the temple one day, you're going in the back of your tent and you're worshiping Moloch the next day. That's what he's saying. That's why you've been in the wilderness 40 years being stiff-necked and wicked, is because you allowed this whoredom to go on. He says, ye turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, ye have offered me slain beasts of sacrifice by 40 years of wilderness. Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry away beyond Babylon. So it explains that that's why they were wandering 40 years in the wilderness, and it's also why they were carried away into Babylon. And it's also why they are, in one sense, still in Babylon in one sense. But anyway, first take a look at, for example, in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 7, even Solomon was carried away in such wickedness. You know, the Bible says that the women that he married caused him to sin. And one particular thing is that they wanted to have an idol to kill their children at. Basically, he allowed Planned Parenthood to take up shop in the kingdom of Israel. 1 Kings 11, chapter 7. It says, Then did Solomon build the high places of Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon, and did likewise he for all the strange wives which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. What were they sacrificing to the gods? They were sacrificing their children. It's Moloch. Second, and that's the problem, is that Solomon, of course, was a wise king and he was a righteous king or whatever, but at the end of the day, he allowed them to turn his eyes, and then he allowed them. That's why his kingdom after his death was divided, because he was allowing this wickedness to occur in his land. 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 3. Remember Ahaz, king of Judah. He gave his own son to Moloch. Now, of course, the King Ahaz eventually gets right with the Lord near the end of his life, and Jezebel gets eaten by dogs and all that good stuff. But chapter 16, verse 3, it says, Behold, I will take away the posterity of Baasha and the posterity of his house, and will make thy house like the house of, oh, that's 1 Kings. I was like, that's not right. 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 3. It says, But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, yea, and made his son to pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel. And he sacrificed and burnt incense to the high places and the hills under every green tree. He set up places for that. In 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 17. And it causes Israel, basically explaining, causing Israel to go and get taken away. He says, And the king Ahaz cut off the borders of the bases and removed the laver from off them, and took down the sea from the brazen oxen that were under it, and it put upon, again, I probably got the wrong passage, but that's fine. But basically it was one of the reasons why the children of Israel were taken into the Assyrian captivity. And then also, of course, King Manasseh of Judah gave his son up to Molech in 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 6. It says, And he made his sons to pass through the fire, that means to be given over to Molech, and observed times and used enchantments. He went after familiar spirits and enchantments, and dwelt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord, and provoked him to anger. And so we see a lot of the problems in Israel were because their kings promoted this abomination of Molech, allowing to spread their seed and kill their children. And then, of course, and then in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10, Josiah, he ends up doing Moloch worship continued because it destroyed the place in that chapter, 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10. It says, And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make their son or his daughter pass through the fire to Moloch. And so Josiah, of course, was one of the righteous kings and so forth, and he started to restore the right things in Israel and so forth, but he ends up an untimely death when he gets killed in the battle between, I believe it was Babylon and Egypt. Went and fought a battle, and then when Egypt got off of the ships to go attack the Babylonians, Josiah led a contingent army against them to stop them from going over, and eventually he died in that battle, and he was able to keep the Egyptians from taking over Babylon, but then Babylon ended up taking over Israel later on. But through all that, he was a righteous king, and he was able to eventually rid them out of the land. And so that was, but that was a little too late after such a long time of being in the land, allowing their children to be defiled and destroyed. Now, a lot of people say, well, what's the big deal? At least the population control's down. And if you actually look at the list of people that were almost told to be aborted in history, and yet their mother or somebody decided, hey, I'm not going to abort them. We have people like Mozart. Just think about life without Mozart. Life without a lot of the people that gave us a lot of science and history. A lot of times they were people that their mothers at one time decided, hey, maybe I should have an abortion or whatever. But they decided against it or something, and it ended up being somebody who gave a great blessing to the world in general. And so you better be careful that a lot of the people that God has plans for that you abort are going to be, the world is worse off for it all around. And so you got to be very careful with this. People that are not married yet, not ready, and you're about ready to, you're just young and stuff. I need to make this very clear right now. And if you want God's blessing on your life and anything that you do in the future, you need to be very certain, very careful not to be spreading your seed. You need to wait till marriage. You need to have one woman, one wife for life, and then you need to, when you have that children, care for them very carefully and in wisdom and in righteousness, and then not be like infidels that let their children pass through the seed. You cannot allow this to happen, particularly as a member of the church. If we see this happening, out the door you go. That's why, and so let's look down here. He says, "And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and I will cut him off from among his people." Now, we understand that Christians, particularly since Leviticus is talking about people that are separated unto the Lord specifically, he says, "And that soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards." People are supposed to be focused on receiving wisdom and understanding and righteousness from the Lord himself, and to have that relationship with God alone. If you want to have a spiritual relationship, it must be with God alone. So oftentimes people say, well, but I want certain things, I want special things, I want certain powers, and God won't give them to me. So I'm going to go to the enchantments, I'm going to go to the curses and the witches and the wizards who's going to put a concoction together, give me the love of my life. You know how everybody always sees somebody given like a magical potion to get the love of your life, or to get some special profit from work, or something like that, and we all joke about it and laugh about it. Ha ha. But the thing is, back in that day especially, is that if God did not give them something, they would try to go after it another way. So they were not content with what God gave them. And so what they would do is oftentimes they would make a pact with the devil. They would make a pact with the spirit, and and then they would go look around for a witch. And like the witch of Endor, God decided, hey, Samuel said, hey, because of your wickedness and not obeying God, Saul, you are cut off from communicating with God from now on, and your kingdom will be taken from you after your death. And so he's like trying to get a hold of God, and God wouldn't speak to him because of his wickedness. And so he went and searched out a witch, the witch of Endor, in order to try and get a hold of Samuel. And then God provided a special circumstance to say, because you got a hold of this witch, you got worse problems on your plate now. And so he ended up having a worse plate. And so what he's saying is that you should not be going after, not only should you not be whoring after Moloch with your seed, you should also not be whoring after familiar spirits, trying to get something that God himself decided not to give you. And to go a-whoring with them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among the people. People that are into witchcraft, into all the supposed, the pagan religions. You claim to be a Christian, and you're going after those things. You claim to be a part of the nation of Israel, you're going after those things. No, you're not allowed to promote those things. Witchcraft and evil and spirits and stuff like that are not to be promoted in the land. And the penalty for that, he says, I will set my face against that soul, and I will cut them off from among his people. In other words, you're not allowed to be part of the sanctuary anymore. You're not allowed to be among the people. You're going to be exiled. The penalty is not necessarily death for this, going after this stuff, but it's exile until you get your heart right. And until you decide, hey, I'm not going to be doing these things. And here's the thing, too, is that it's not like a long-term punishment. It is basically, as long as you are going after these things to do them, then you are going to be cut off from your people. In other words, like a lot of times people hear the Amish do the shunning or whatever. When somebody does something wrong or bad or worthy of punishment, they would just kind of not talk to them and turn their way until the person gets right. Correct? And so that's similar to what's happening here, is that you should not be indulging people in familiar spirits and these things, and you are not to be going a-whoring after them, interacting with them, and you should have no association with them. And those people that decide to live in that lifestyle, you're supposed to cut them off. He says, sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. So notice this. He dealt with the people going forward after Moloch, which is a fleshly whoring, and then he dealt with the familiar spirits, which is a spiritual whoring. So both situations, they're supposed to be one with the Lord and keep their seed righteous before the Lord, and to keep it alive and to take care of it on the flesh side. On the spirit side, they're supposed to only have one God. They're supposed to only deal with the spiritual realm through God. And any other direction, you do anything else with your seed, then you're going whoring. If you do anything else with other spirits, then you're going whoring. And so you better be careful of that. You'll be cut off from your people. And he says, sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God is holy. He's saying you need to be focused on me alone. You need to raise your seed up to the Lord and not abort it, and so forth. You need to be holy and not go searching after spirits. Just keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctify you. See, notice this is that sanctify yourselves. So oftentimes people will argue, oh, is it God that sanctifies us, or is it we that are supposed to be sanctifying? But this is how it works. Sanctify yourselves, God sanctifies you. In other words, submit yourselves. Remember that? God gives grace to the humble. You submit yourself for sanctification, and God will sanctify you. God gives grace to the humble, but then God resists the proud. If you do not put yourself in a condition to be humbled, do not put yourself in a condition to be sanctified, then God will resist you. But then we as God's people need to have a humble heart, a contrite spirit, and so forth. Then He will give us grace to be able to be sanctified by His work in our lives. And so that's what he's saying, is that you guys need to not do those things so that I will sanctify you. And so those particular things are ended with sanctifying yourself. So if you take care, if you don't give your seed to Molech and you don't go whoring after other spirits, then I will sanctify you, essentially is what that's explaining. And ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctify you. So if you do my statutes, then I will sanctify you. So it takes a partnership. It takes this situation. That's what God tells us to do. Now, obviously, it's God that does the cleansing. It's God that does the sanctifying. But it is also, on our part, willing to be to do His statutes so that we will be in a proper condition in order for us to receive from the Lord. And so that He puts in there after those two, so that we won't go whoring after them, but that we will be faithful to God. For everyone that curseth his father and his mother shall be surely put to death. He that hath cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. Now remember, he's focusing on this relationship you're supposed to have with him, first of all. You're supposed to be faithful to God alone, not go whoring. And then he says, for everyone that curseth his father or mother shall be surely put to death. So he focuses on God's relationship first in this, and the penalty for violating that. And then he says, now the penalty for cursing your father and your mother, your physical parents, your God, now your parents, then it will be death. Cursing here is basically where, say, not just, you just get mad at your dad one day and you just curse at him, it's like, how dare you tell me to do that, whatever, just in a fit of anger. But rather it is, the curse here is saying, I wish the gods, or I wish God would curse you and have a horrible life. You just basically, you as a person, just condemning your father and not obeying him, and you're just saying, hey, I want nothing to do with you. Whatever you say, I wish there be a curse on it. I don't want any blessings in your life. And just all in all out, forsaking your father and your mother and doing whatever you can to hurt them, and so forth. And so in this passage, it's explaining that just as you are faithful to me and I sanctify you, so too you need to be faithful with your parents. Just that relationship like you have with me has to be there with your parents. You have so many people that they seem to somehow to be spiritual, but then they go around cursing their father and their mother and not respecting them and all these things. You're not respecting God either. And you shall keep my and so he says, for everyone that curseth his father or his mother shall be surely be put to death. He hath cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon them. His blood shall be upon them. an interesting phrase. This is a new phrase. First of all, we've seen somebody getting stoned with stones for punishment of Molech, getting cut off, his family being ostracized, and the penalty for not killing him. And then we have of course being my face is against you. And then here is his blood shall be upon him. So if you go around cursing your father and your mother, God's going to say your blood is going to be upon you. In other words, remember in the blood atonement, God is the one who sanctifies you through his blood, right? And so therefore, if he's saying, hey, you're going to bear your own blood. You're going to be responsible for what you are cursing your father and your mother for. My people who are called by my name don't curse their father and their mother. If you want your days to be living long on the earth, then you're going to not curse your father and your mother. And so, remember this: when they have the blood atonement, the substitutionary blood atonement of the animal, and like they do a sin, they do something that is wrong, and then they say, oh, I did this wrong thing. I need to make peace with God, so I go to the temple with my blood sacrifice, and for making peace with God, my sin offering, and all those things. And then that blood atones for that sin you committed, right? As in fellowship with God, not for salvation, all this stuff, but a person that curses their father and their mother and wishes death upon their father and their mother, or causes destruction on their father or their mother's livelihood or their well-being, then you have no substitutionary atonement for that, and God's wrath will be upon you. Remember, because the 5 sacrifices of the saved Israelite who is in fellowship with the temple and so forth, they can offer the sacrifice so that God's wrath will not be upon them. But then if God's wrath is upon you, because it says here, his blood shall be upon him. In other words, there is no atonement for that wrath for committing such a sin. So you got to be very careful in this, because God says that if you curse your father and your mother and you wholly do not want to do anything, and now obviously there's, again, I'm not trying to make excuses for what's here, but there are things when you repent and turn back and you ask forgiveness from your father and your mother, then the wrath is appeased, of course. But if you're in that state and so forth, especially here in this passage, there's nothing to cleanse that sin, there's nothing to get rid of that. God's wrath will be upon you because you've cursed your father and your mother. That is not a light matter. In other words, if God, for example, if you're going along life's road and there's an accident waiting to happen, and God's angel says, hey, I'm going to protect him from that, but then he says, hey, no, this guy is not in fellowship with his father and their mother, we're going to allow the thing to happen to them or whatever. That's basically God's wrath being upon them. He's not going to be pacified for that evil. And of course now Deuteronomy gives some parameters for this and explanations that, hey, they can't just be like, you've cursed me, son, I'm going to go kill you now. That's how a lot of people take these laws in here, and they say, you've committed this sin, I'm going to go kill you, I'm going to go stone you, I'm going to do all these things. But the thing is, Deuteronomy gives an explanation in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18. They'll take him before the elders and the judges of the land. Then you can look at it later if you want, but I'll just explain that they'll take him before the elders and judges of the land, and they'll say, this my son, is a gluttonous and a winebibber. He eats our food, he lives in our house, he does all these things, and he's old enough to go on his own maybe, but yet every single time he puts our food in his mouth, he curses us. Every single time he puts our drink into his mouth, he insults us and condemns us, and he won't do what we say, and he's rebellious, and he does these wicked things, and people give this, and the guy is doing evil, wicked things to his parents while the parents are sustaining him. Do you think that makes any sense at all to do that? No, there needs to be respect there. Thank you, Father and Mother, for giving a roof over my head. Thank you, Father and Mother, for giving me food to eat and clothes to wear and education and ways to live life and all these wonderful things to raise me in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But then there's people that they get all these things from their parents, and then they're always cursing their father and mother. They're rebellious. They won't pull their weight around the family. They won't do the chores. And now it's not just like a lazy kid and just a time of rebellion or whatever, but just somebody who is attempting to physically harm their parents while taking advantage of their family relationship. So there's a procedure to go through, and then it is the judges and the elders who determine that yes, this child is in fact in deep rebellion and cursing their father and their mother, and therefore here's the punishment or whatever, or maybe no, the child is not in such deep rebellion, he just needs to work on certain attitude adjustments, whatever, and then they will set a perimeter for that according to Deuteronomy. But here in this passage is making clear that you can, up to the point of death, be slain for cursing your father and your mother, and God himself will have his wrath upon you. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And then the man that lieth with his father's wife and uncovereth his father's nakedness, both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Notice that it's death for both of those situations. Remember the guy in 1 Corinthians where Paul was dealing with, and they were glorying in his wickedness, where he had his father's wife, married his father's wife, and he was put out of the church? No, the church didn't go off and kill him, but he should have been. He was worthy of death, but the church just exiled him from the church. And then eventually that guy got right, and he was allowed back to the church. And so we need to understand that these are the penalties for it, but not always carried out depending on the situation. But here he says, their blood shall be upon them. If you go about committing adultery and going about trying to marry your father's wife and all this stuff, your blood, God's wrath is going to be upon you, just as it was with the with the child that curses his father and mother. Why is that? Because you're ruining the family dynamic, the family that God set up properly. You're going against that. And the man that lied, and then if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have brought confusion, and their blood shall be upon them. Brought confusion, their blood is upon them. In other words, the wrath of God is going to be upon them. Man lie with mankind, so he lie with a woman. Both of them have committed abomination. Remember, we dealt with this in chapter 18. They've done abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. So they're just as, and again, with the action here, it is linked in together with the other things, such as adultery. So many people focus on the homosexual lifestyle, the action there. I should not say the lifestyle, but the action, and then they ignore adultery, or they ignore the other relationship, faux pas, or whatever that word is, and they kind of elevate it in this list. But the thing is that it is just as vile and evil as adultery. It's just as vile and evil as having your father's wife. It's just vile and evil as having having your daughter-in-law. It's confusion, it's evil, but then also in addition to all those things being the same punishment, he adds in there, it is abomination. So what is that? And remember from chapter 18, that these things, their blood is upon them, and God's wrath is against them, but the abomination says, this is something I particularly hate. This is something I particularly hate and abhor. And so he wanted to put that in there in particular, because that is one of the things that are being accepted primarily in society today, and many societies have started with that one first. Obviously they had the adultery and all those things, and then they start promoting that. It's a stage. They start with one after the other. Notice this, it's a stage of life. Remember, Romans 1 is a cycle into sin, and this is also a cycle into sin. What do people start doing in defiling society? First, they start sleeping around. Then they start getting involved in other religions, the familiar spirits and other things like that. And then they start going after. Then they start defiling God's sanctuary, and then they start disrespecting their parents, getting rid of the family dynamic, and then they start disrespecting the covenant between their husband and their wife, and then they start disrespecting the relationships between the rest of the family dynamics, and then they start spiraling down into homosexuality, the sleeping with the same gender of the same sex. And then, after this, it's always guaranteed, you're going to see next on the scale, is they're going to go trying to make bestiality acceptable. See, we've already had the other ones. Remember, people are commonly sleeping around, not caring where their seat's going. They got other religions and other infidels and familiar spirits and paganality, and then they're going down that spiral of sin as a society. And then next on the list is if a man takes a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. Now he's marrying now it's polygamy. So first it's man and woman together, and woman with woman, man with man. Now it's polygamy, and then now it is a wife and his mother, and then it is wickedness. They shall be burnt with fire, both he and they. So see, the man with man, woman with woman is abomination, and their blood will be upon them. And then the man taking his wife as a marriage, that's polygamy, and it is also taking the mother and the wife together. It is wickedness. He says that is wickedness, and they shall be burned with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. Now, burned with fire there typically can be burned alive with fire, but other people say, well, that was actually branding them, the marking them, showing them that they are, to remind them that it was wrong to do. And so that they would somehow mark them with fire. They would brand them, kind of like how, what is that thing, that famous book or whatever, where she had a scarlet letter put on her or whatever. What was that? The Scarlet Letter or whatever? Huh? That's the name of the book, Scarlet Letter or something, or whatever. She did something that was wrong. She was basically branded with the Scarlet Letter. Yeah, and so that's similar to what I think commentator Adam Clark had that position, was that they branded them for committing such wickedness, so that whenever they were punished for it, and then they saw the mark in their flesh, they realized what they'd done, and they would bear that the rest of their life. And so that's an option there as well, and so forth. Typically, but basically they are burned with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. Now, obviously, if you get branded, I don't know how that would get rid of the wickedness. So I'm probably leaning towards the fact that they were burnt with fire, so that everybody would fear it. You know, just getting a tattoo. How many people get a tattoo nowadays, right? So it's a pretty big wickedness, and that spiraling down. If a man lie with the beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast as well. And if a man approach unto a beast, and if a woman approach unto a beast to lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. So in other words, these things where it says their blood shall be upon them, in other words, if they do it and they don't get caught, then God's wrath is going to be upon them. That's what it's talking about here. Because remember, again, this doesn't explain the procedure to, this is the penalty chapter, but it doesn't explain the procedure, because the penalty basically requires, remember in the other passages, it requires basically, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 6 through 7, I believe it is, it requires 2 or 3 witnesses with the same story. In other words, I saw them commit this abomination, and therefore, my witness, I'm willing to pick up it had to be 2 or 3 witnesses that had the same story, and they were willing to cast the first stone. And so don't just think that somebody gets an accusation against them, oh, they committed this abomination, or he lay with this, or that guy's gay, or this guy's whatever, they're just throwing out accusations. Oh no, everybody grab a stone and stone them. You know, that's the way a lot of people think that they did in ancient Israel, was to just hear an accusation and then everybody goes around mob rule and stones them and the whole vile. But the thing is that a lot of this lists the penalties, but not everybody received the penalty for it, because obviously if somebody commits abomination inside their house and nobody sees it, there are no witnesses to carry out the punishment, right? And so you need to understand that the scripture was very clear. It takes 2 or 3 witnesses with the same story willing to prosecute before the judges before penalty is carried out. And this is the, oftentimes they'll have a minimum penalty and then a maximum penalty depending on circumstances or whatever. And this is the maximum sentence. But the thing is that a lot of people, they commit these wicked sins and abominations and wickedness and lewdness and spreading their seed around, but nobody is there to witness it, and therefore the penalty is not carried out by law because they not met the criteria, and they're going around thinking, oh, I got away with this. Nobody saw me curse my father and my mother. Nobody saw me lay with this woman, and we're not going to tell anybody. And nobody saw her get an abortion. We're not going to tell anybody. We were underneath the grove when we sacrificed to Molech. We were doing all these things. A lot of people oftentimes will hide their sin, but in particular, these are, if 2 or 3 people see you do it and are willing to prosecute and stuff, that must be getting pretty bad in the land. It's particular where as they go, an example would be, as they go into the promised land, Balak is trying to curse the nation of Israel and all this stuff, and God says, I can't, and Balaam says, God won't allow me to curse them because they're his people and the protection is upon them. But here's what you need to do. You need to bring all the ladies who are willing to sleep with the men of Israel and then send them down into the camp. And then it worked so well that they were starting to get venereal diseases. And they were, in fact, Phineas, which was one of the priests in the temple, was serving in the temple. And there's this guy, not even inside of his tent, but out before the temple door, making out with this whore. And he goes and he takes it. He's so enraged by this because they're doing it in public. They're not even afraid of the penalties that they're getting, that were commanded in this chapter. And they're openly doing this stuff in rebellion against God before his temple. And then, look at us doing this thing. And then so he takes a spear because nobody was carrying out punishment. Nobody was willing to witness against them. So he took the spear and he pierced them through. And then the Bible says that they saw, basically the land of Israel, the children of Israel saw him do that, and then they begin to fear, and they cast out all the whores from the place. And then the Bible says that action caused the disease to cease in the land. And so a lot of this stuff, though these are the penalties, they don't get away with it. So therefore, Bible makes it clear that even if you don't get away with it, you're going to bear that iniquity, or you're going to bear that sin. That's why the Bible says clearly here, their blood shall be upon them. When the Bible says their blood shall be upon them, means even if you get away with it, God is going to be against you because he sees all. And so that makes it very clear that even if you think you can get away with one of these things, God says, my wrath is going to be against you. I'll be against you even if nobody sees it. And then it lists more things. A man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, and mother daughter, and see their nakedness, and so forth. Cut them off in the sight of their people, exile them. And then it says, he shall bear his iniquity. He's going to bear that. There's no restitution for that. You've committed the crime, and now you have to deal with it for the rest of your life. See, the penalty there is that what you've committed, you have to deal with for the rest of your life. And then verse 19, uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister or thy father's sister, uncover near kin, they shall bear their iniquity. If a man shall lie with, in other words, bear their iniquity, basically the result of that relationship. A lot of times somebody is a molester, and then the child or whoever has a child out of the wedlock or from that relationship to uncover their nakedness. It says bear their iniquity. You have to bear the result of that saying. A lot of times people, like I said before, they gave their children up to Molech because they were children that they did not want. And then so they do this nakedness thing where they have relationships with their relationships, and you're not allowed to abort that child is what that thing is saying. You need to bear the iniquity or the result of that relationship that you committed. Even though it was a wicked relationship and you shouldn't have had it, does not justify you in killing the child that is the result of that relationship or the result of that thing. So if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, he hath uncovered an uncle's nakedness, they shall bear their sin, and they shall die childless. And so the penalty for that is God not allowing them to have children. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, and an unclean thing hath uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall die childless. And then at the end is a conclusion of this chapter. Remember, he gives all these lists, and different ones have certain lists, bearing the iniquity, bearing their blood, and so forth, realizing that even if there's 2 or 3 witnesses that don't witness these, and you get away with it, you think God is going to be against you, God is going to oppose you. He says, ye shall therefore, because of these penalties against these moral wickednesses, these penalties, he says, ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them, that the land, whether I bring you to dwell therein, spew you not out. So if you start allowing these things to build up and build up, then the land is going to spew you out, just like the ones before you. Remember, that's why they went off to the Babylonian captivity. Judah went off to Babylon. Israel went off to Assyrian captivity because of these wickedness, things that they allowed to happen in their land. So too, that it happened in their land, we see that the penalties are building up in our land, that there's no penalty, there's no law against these things anymore in our land. You know, on the books somewhere, there's a penalty or a law against it, but a lot of times it's ignored. A lot of times they say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, it's between 2 consenting adults. Oh, it's the mother's right to choose. Oh, they explain all these things away. And yet, just because you get away with it does not mean that you're not going to bear the iniquity or the result of that situation. You're not going to have the wrath of God against you because you committed it, and so forth. So these particular sins you are not to do whatsoever in order to stay in fellowship with God, in order not to have his wrath against you and to treat you in anger. You shall therefore keep my statutes and do all my judgments and do them, that the land whether I bring you to dwell spew you not out. And you shall not walk in the manner of the nation. See, we're not supposed to walk in the manner of the nation in which we're in, or which they were in. Ye shall not walk in the manner of the nation. Well, the nation is doing it, so it must be okay for me. I just want to be one of the people. I want to be like a normal American. You know, I want to just live life normally and sprinkle a little bit of Jesus in my life. No, you cannot live your life that way. You cannot just say, I'm going to be the typical American spreading my seed to Molech. I'm going to be a typical American divorcing 10, 20 times. Typical American who's okay with homosexual behavior and bestiality and polygamy and all these things. And no crime, no punishment, no body, no foul, or whatever. And just kind of ignoring these things. He says, you shall not walk in the manner of the nation which I cast you out before you. If we want to be a holy people, if we want to separate God, then we need to be walking in the statutes that God gave us. For they committed all these things. Hey, the nation around us are committing these things, and therefore I abhorred them. Remember what we learned in Leviticus chapter 18 that abhor means? It means to hate, despise, and to really just not like it whatsoever, and be so disgusted with it. You know, remember, it's just vilely disgusted. And so what does it say there? He says that the land not spew you out, and therefore, why did he hate the Ammonites? Why did he hate those people that he allowed to be cast out and allowed to be destroyed? It's because I abhorred them because they did these things in this passage. You see, does God love America today? Fortunately, he has salt and light with the Christians in there preserving America, and we need to be a holy people to God. But the thing is that as these things build, his wrath is going to be upon us. So we need to be careful. Are we going to be salt and light in our world today? Or are we going to just kind of ignore these things in our family, ignore these things in our nation, and say, well, that's just the way of the world, it's the law of the land, we're not going to do anything about it, we're just going to serve Jesus in our own little way, in our own little corner, hidden away, and we're going to let people do things for Moloch, we're going to do these things. No, he says as a nation, if we care about our nations as Christians, we're going to be using the power of the vote. We're going to be using our representatives to say, hey, we don't want abortion. Hey, we don't want these things. Hey, we want to have one man, one woman for life. We want to sanctify and make holy the sacred union of the family and so forth. But I have said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, which have separated from their people. So if we don't allow these things in our land, we inherit the land. If you will, people often say, hey, this land is wicked and there's nothing we can do about it. It's this Laodicean age and all these excuses. But the Bible talks about if we who are God's people turn our face back to the Lord and do what is right in our land, then He'll heal our land. You see, we need to realize that whether our nation, America, or whatever nation that somebody is in, is dependent upon God's people doing as God asks to do, to be separated unto Him in order to heal our land. Not just ourselves, but our land. You shall therefore put difference between the clean beast and the unclean, between the unclean fowls and the clean, and you shall not make your souls abominable by the beast, or by the fowl, or by any manner of living thing that creepeth in the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you. Not just kind of made you special and sprinkled a little Jesus in you, but I have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine. If you are God, if you belong to God, then you are His, and you ought to sever yourself from the wicked. And then it ends there with a man or a woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. Remember, and they shall stone him with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Remember in the first part when they dealt with this, it was people that were seeking them out. And the last part is dealing with people that actually practice it. And so it ends there with the fact that we are to be a holy people, and we are not supposed to be kind of doing this whole Americanized thing. Well, you seek after God in the Hindu way. You seek after God the Antichrist way, with a Jewish way without Jesus. You seek God kind of through nature and kind of be in harmony with the spirits and creation and worship the creation and all this stuff. No, you're supposed to put those things away from you. We can't mix and match. There's these supposed churches where the Baptist faith puts everything together and all these spiritualist supposed churches that say, oh, we get a little bit of faith from that person and a little bit of faith from that thing. The thing is that we as Christians need to realize that if we want to remain in America, if we want to be strong as Christians in America, we're not going to be living life like the typical average American that knows not God and that lives in their own way with a little bit of Jesus sprinkled in. We need to be separated unto God. We need to be a holy people. We need not to take care of these things. We need to realize, especially realize, that not only should we be holy unto the Lord, but if we are partakers with these things, that God will be against us. God's wrath will be upon us. We will not be effectual soul winners. We will not be able to save people from their sin because we're dwelling with them in it. Pigs cannot save other pigs from the mud. If you understand what I mean. You need to be sanctified, toss them a lifeline, and get them on the Lord's side. And so the thing is here is that if we sanctify ourselves and don't do these things, then God's wrath will not be against us. God's power will be for us. Remember, the same spirit that slew Ananias and Sapphira is the same spirit that empowered the early church to do what it was supposed to do. The same spirit that was effectual in being powerful in saving souls is the same spirit that causes the wrath in somebody's life and causes them to be not effectual because of their desire to do those particular sins. So we need to be a holy people, severed, not just sprinkled in Jesus, but severed from the lost world so that we in turn can save them from sin, save them from hellfire, save them, because we cannot do it looking like them. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage. Lord, help us to realize that these are strong penalties for a reason, so that not only will we desire through love and kindness and compassion that you have for all people to be with you, but also that we realize that if we decide, hey, we want to just do our own thing, that there's severe penalties for it, and that those who do not desire heaven will surely be sent to hell. Lord, I just pray that you'll Help us to realize that you are God, you are holy, and that a holy and righteous people cannot live like the world and expect to not be burned. Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to be sanctified unto you. Help us to live righteous and holy so that we in holiness can heal our land. In Jesus' name I pray.